African countries should reduce public spending in the face of shrinking revenue. Speaking in Abdjan, Cote d'Ivoire, policy analyst and advocacy officer in charge of sovereign debt management at AFRODAD, Joshua Otieno, says more than 30 African countries are spending more on debt service than on health and education sectors.
Although borrowing is vital in bridging budgetary financing gaps, most African countries need to work towards expanding the tax base, given that on average, domestic revenue is 18% of the GDP in Africa and 12% for low-income countries, yet 65% of the most economies are made up of the informal sector.
Tax to GDP is below the threshold that's needed. Actually, Africa domestic resource mobilization and tax revenue is between 10 to 15%, which does not really give a good picture of how a continent can grow independently to service some of its development agenda.
Otieno says most African countries spend revenue collected on servicing debt, leaving little for key social sectors such as health and education.
Out of $10 we collect, 7 to 8 goes to debt repayment. We have to have alternative solutions that are Pan-African in nature and is for Africa.
Speaking at the 4th edition of the AFRODAD Media Initiative in Abdjan, Cote d'Ivoire, he says it is time to look for alternative model solutions and approach in addressing the debt crisis, adding that it is shocking how governments and institutions that have promoted a borrowing spree are now calling for debt relief measures.
So the role of the citizens becomes very important, number one, to hold the government accountable. Account for what purposes you want to borrow the loan, right? Account how much it is for. Account for why that interest has been set at that particular percentage. And then transparency, right? Hold your government to account to be transparent.
As of 2022, Africa's debt had hit $1.8 trillion, with countries such as Ghana, Sierra Leone and DRC debt to GDP ratio above 80%. Now, policy makers are calling for good governance, accountability and transparency in addressing the debt crisis in Africa. Warin Mujenga reporting from Ivory Coast.